yourself first. If this is a triggering topic for you, please do not continue watching. For those who will continue and choose to stay, today we are talking about a man of Egypt called Al-Tourbini, which literally translates to the express train. I will also be giving myself some grace because this is a very difficult case to talk about. Okay. Um, so, um, you need to understand that Egypt's railway system is one of the oldest in Africa. The trains connect Cairo to Alexandria, to Beni Suef, to Ethiopia, to Tanta. It's a thread throughout goes down the entirety of the Nile River and branches out to up there in the Mediterranean. It carries millions of passengers every year from the poor to working class, the nameless, faceless, homeless, millions who move between Egyptian cities for work and family survival. Basically, its trains are life, and that's how the country breathes. And for the street children of Egypt, estimated around 500,000 boys and girls who live without homes, without families, without any safety net, in one of the most densely populated countries on earth. The trains were shelter to them. They meant warmth. It's a way to move between cities looking for food or work. And they would climb onto the carriages or the rooftops of the trains because they had nowhere else to go. And that is exactly where he knew to find them. His name was Ramadan Abdel Rehim Mansour. He was born around 1980 in a city called Tanta. It's a town north of Cairo in Gharbiya Governorate. He would become known across Egypt by a different name, Al-Tourbini, the express train. They named him after the train on which he committed his heinous crimes. Over the course of 7 years, he raped and murdered at least 32 children and youths across multiple Egyptian cities, including Alexandria, Beni Suef, Cairo, and Ethiopia. All of his victims were aged 10 to 14 years old. I'm sorry. 7 years, 32 confirmed victims, possibly more. And for most of those 7 years, nobody in power came looking for these poor, homeless, helpless children. To understand Al-Tourbini, you have to go back to Tanta. He, at the age of 12, began working in a small cafe at the local railway station to help support his family. He returned home at the end of the day and handed over his wages to his parents. A 12-year-old boy working at a train station cafe. Unfortunately, the young boy was bullied mercilessly by neighborhood gangsters. And he was weak. He was too small to fight back and too poor to quit his job, which made him the perfect faces lost in the Niles, bodies on remote tracks, children whose disappearance no one had even formally recorded. The actual number unfortunately died with him, if he even remembers it or knows exactly how much. From 1999 to 2006. I want you to think about what 7 years means. 7 years of school, 7 years of watching a child grow from a 10-year-old to a 17-year-old. 7 years of Egyptian trains running on time, carrying millions of passengers, while on the rooftop above their heads, children were being killed. How? How does something like that continue for 7 years? That's why this case is very hard for me to talk about, is because it could have been prevented, it could have been discovered earlier. They could have done something for these poor kids. And how does something like that continue for 7 years? As I keep asking, this is what I'm stuck on. The answer is painful, and we never really made peace with it. It's because the victims were street children. The case spotlighted the plight of an estimated 500,000 street children nationwide, 500,000 children living without protection in these cities at the time, without official records, without parents filing reports, without school attendance records to notice an absence, without anyone whose job is to count them, track them, find them when they disappeared. When a child from a family goes missing, the machinery of the state moves. Police reports, missing person searches, family members knocking on doors. But when a street child goes missing, there's just silence, because nobody knows, nobody cares. I need to calm down. My apologies. Now, Mansour understood this better than anyone. He had been a street child himself. He had lived that invisibility, and he exploited it. It's plain and simple. Now the media coverage amplified the case through sensationalism, portraying it as a stark symbol of urban decay and moral breakdown in society. But the media was only paying attention after the arrest. For 7 years before that, while children disappeared from the drain across the Delta, while small broken bodies were found on the tracks and riverbanks, the story was not told. The victims were not named, and the pattern was never connected. There was no shortage. There was no shortage of information, but nobody looked, nobody bothered to look. of still processing 2 decades later. After the arrest, Mansour reportedly told the prosecutors that he was possessed by a female jinn who commanded him to commit the crimes. A female jinn. I mean, it's original. You gotta say, it's original. Crazy, but original. He sat across from prosecutors in a room in Tanta and said that a supernatural female spirit had taken possession of him and ordered him to do what he did to those children. I don't know what to do with that claim, honestly. And I don't think any of us at the time knew what to do with it either. It was, what is that? Like a calculated defense or genuine belief? Psychosis. A last attempt to avoid accountability by using like an evil outside of himself kind of theory. Of course, nobody believed him. The prosecutors didn't believe him. The judge didn't believe him. And the public did not believe him. But the fact that he said it, that he reached for jinn, tells us something about a man who could not or would not look directly at what he was and what he had done. That's my take. Now the ringleaders, Ramadan Abdel Rehim Mansour and Samir Mahmoud, known as Hanata, like I told you before, were convicted and sentenced to death by the criminal court in Tanta in 2007. The trial took place in the same city where Mansour had grown up, where he had worked in a cafe at 12 years old and been beaten up by gangsters, where his story had first bent towards darkness. 5 other accomplices were also convicted in the case, but they were spared execution. They received a prison sentence ranging from 3 to 40 years, which is insane. 3 to 40 years for men who participated in rape, torture, murder of children. The public debated those sentences. Many felt that mercy was misplaced. Mansour's own execution did not come immediately. The Egyptian legal system, as we saw with the previous case of the Butcher of New Cairo, requires multiple levels of review for a death sentence. Appeals were filed, the court considered them, and so on and so forth, and that is why it took a while. But Mansour and Mahmoud were both executed by hanging in Burj Al Arab prison on Thursday, December 16th, 2010. 4 years after his arrest, 11 years after his first confirmed killing in a prison outside Alexandria, the same city whose trains he had used as hunting grounds. He was at the time approximately 30 years old. Now, I will not pretend to know what justice looks like in a case like this. I don't think it looks like anything clear whose job is to notice that they disappear. I guess it's better late than never. Others, looking at 32 small graves, said nothing because there are really no words adequate for better late. I've covered 2 other dark cases on this channel. Raya and Sakina, the sisters of the butcher sisters of Lebanon, and I've covered the butcher of New Cairo, a more modern monster hiding behind social media. But this one hits differently because the victims of Tourbini weren't children. Children who had already been failed once by poverty, by family, by a system that had left them on the streets, and then they were failed again and again and again. Their names were not widely recorded, their faces were not on newspapers, they were disappeared, there were no search